Where will your entrepreneurial journey take you? To exciting new products and services, new organizational innovations, and new geographic locations. It did for Clay Miller.
This is the Economics for Entrepreneurs podcast. Entrepreneurs are economic heroes. They improve others' lives with preferred products and services, innovation, and value. We offer you the knowledge and tools to make your entrepreneurial journey a successful one by building a beautiful business. Now, here's your host, Hunter Hastings.
Hi, Hunter Hastings here. We tell entrepreneurial journey stories here at Economics for Entrepreneurs for many reasons, mostly because they're instructive. They reveal that identity, intent, and context can drive entrepreneurs to great economic achievements. And that's not the same as planning. Entrepreneurship is a bet on the future. There are many probabilities, but no certainty. Identity is who you are. It's the specifics of your skills and of your project and of your partners. Intent is the desire to get somewhere without needing to be assured of every last detail before you set off, or even that there is a final destination. And context is the immediate environment in which you operate. Your customers, their desires, the market, the economy, the regulatory climate. You take it all into account, and you know that your actions are context-specific. Entrepreneurs perceive their environment, including the customer dissatisfactions that can be addressed and the economic problems that can be solved. They make decisions, and they act. Psychologists call this the Pda Cycle: perceive, decide, act. Customers follow the same cycle. They perceive their options, they make their decisions, and they act by buying or not buying. The result for the customer is an experience, one that they will assess at a later date and plug back into their next Pda cycle. The same is true for entrepreneurs. You act, there is a resulting experience, and you plug it back into your Pda cycle. Act and learn. Or as our guest David Hurst put it recently, act your way to better thinking. It's never ending and it never stops. From time to time, you can look back at your journey and replay the Pda cycle and prepare for the next one. Our entrepreneurial journey stories provide you with views of others' Pda cycles. We're reviewing a fascinating journey today, an as yet unfinished one, I might emphasize, that starts very early in life, and that makes you think about the get started now versus wait until later decision. It illustrates the effect of different partners, different industry contexts, and different capital structures. It illustrates organizational innovations and geographical arbitrage. Our guest today is Clay Miller. Clay has been a technology entrepreneur for over 20 years. He is the founder of LifeLogix, a technology firm serving the organ and tissue transplant industry, and for the past 10 years has run a global outsourcing firm, while he also serves in a role that he himself pioneered as an external embedded chief technical officer. He does this for multiple firms in fintech, mobile security, and AI businesses. Clay, welcome to Economics for Entrepreneurs.
Thank you for having me.
We love to highlight creative and original entrepreneurial journeys because they're great examples to others who might be on the start of their own or thinking about the entrepreneurial journey. And you've certainly mapped one out. So we're going to talk to you about outsourced CTOs, about an American designing a global business model serving U.S. clients from Asia, about building entrepreneurial and other communities, and about software innovation.
Awesome.
We like to start, Clay, with your origin story, just so that we know the beginning, where you grew up, your family, your education, and maybe how you identified technology as an interest in a field. So let's start there.
Well, my background and where I grew up and how I had selected technology as my field all kind of run together. So I was originally born in High Point, North Carolina, and I grew up in the Triad area, Winston-Salem, Greensboro, High Point area of North Carolina. I went to a private school my entire life from K-5 all the way through 12th grade. My mother was a teacher there. But in terms of technology, I got my first Commodore 64 when I was 11 years old, and it was already aging, and I didn't really have a lot of software that was being written for it. And my cousin had given me a stack of family computing magazines, and in those magazines, they had all kinds of little programs you could write for the Commodore 64. So you could write little games, you could write little utilities and things like that. And so I would look at the software in these magazines and then write it, even as 11, 12-year-old boy. And so I kind of had a natural aptitude for that. And once I got the taste for programming and technology, I started to expand my horizons. I bought a Tandy 1000, which was my first IBM compatible PC running MS DOS. And I started learning C, and I didn't really understand what a quote unquote programmer was. So I went and bought Peter Norton's PC Programmer's Bible, and mostly it focused on the assembly language, which any technology person knows is probably the most complicated place you could start. It's very integrated with the hardware, and it really gave me an interesting foundation, being able to jump over those hurdles of complexity when I was 12, 13, 14 years old, learning programming. Well, later on in my high school career, a local entrepreneur was building software for our school, and he came to the school and he asked who your best computer science student is, and they referred him to me, and he gave me a book on relational database systems and gave me a computer, and in a couple weeks I built a system for him, and he was impressed enough to actually hire me. So my first programming job professionally, I was 16 years old. And so I actually worked as a programmer throughout high school, building accounting software for the school, and also barcode scanning technology for the library. And I already, because I worked with him in his local business, I got a taste for entrepreneurship, what it took to run a small business, and also the influence of my grandfather, who had a electrical contracting firm, who I also worked for in the summers. I really knew that entrepreneurship and business was probably going to be in my future. I started college in 1998, and so this was right at the beginning of the dot-com bubble, as everything was ramping up and becoming very hot. So I actually had several consulting clients already when I was a freshman in college, and I started to take on more and more responsibility and more clients. And I got connected with a investor. He was an angel investor that would help small technology companies go public on the stock market. And he was very, very good with finance, but did not know a lot about technology. So I kind of became his technology consultant, and we would go into these companies and analyze their processes, analyze their technology, determine what needed to be done in order to take them public. As you can imagine, that took quite a bit of time. And in the process of my college career, it started to interfere with my studies. I was going to have to make a choice at one point or another. And I was sitting in a history class one day listening to the professor talk. He was defending history as a career path, and becoming an educator in the future. And on my notepad, I was drawing out a flow chart for a system that I was designing for a direct response mail marketing firm that was a customer of mine. And I thought, I'm probably making twice as much money as this guy is. So why am I sitting here listening to him? And so I actually left after that semester and continued my consulting all the way through the dot-com explosion and through the bust. And so that was my first real experience with a central bank created collapse. And even though I, at the time, didn't really understand all of that yet, but I had gone through that process. And so, yeah, that's my background. That's how I ended up in technology in the beginning.
Were you making decisions then? It sounds like you were, about history versus software and coding, but was this an active decision process, or it just kind of rolled along, and maybe was an inflection point in that history lecture? How did you feel about it from a decision-making standpoint?
Well, the standard protocol for children in the United States is you get an education, you go get a job, and you work, in that job, and you build a career. And that's fine for some people, but not everyone falls into that mold exactly. And I knew that school for me was a little bit too slow. I was always wanting to do something more faster, and I felt like it was just slowing me down, grinding through these lectures. And so I knew that probably if once I had a good plan for moving forward, that was probably going to be there was going to be a decision. I knew as soon as I started acquiring enough clients, and I was spending so much time programming, and so even late at night working through different project plans and different coding that I was doing at the time. Even though I was trying to balance both, I knew that if I reach a certain point, I'm going to have to decide. I'm either going to choose my customers, or I'm going to choose the normal path that everybody else follows. And really what it came down to was that I knew that I could continue my education anytime. And this opportunity that I had may not last forever. And so my choice was to go try to build a business and to continue in that vein. And I have never looked back. And I'm not saying that I don't have any regrets at all, but for me, knowledge is extremely important. But how you acquire that knowledge is less important. And so if I can read a book like Human Action, or sit in a lecture regarding human action, if I walk away with the same knowledge, then that's what's the most important, not necessarily the process of acquiring that information.
Right. We are listening to Clay Miller's entrepreneurial journey story, which started in high school in North Carolina and led him to building new technology, an emerging new industry, and a new global organizational model for technical service provision. It's never too early or too late to start, and you can find some stimulating support for operationalizing your ideas from our Austrian Entrepreneurial Journey online course. Check it out at e4epod.com/journey. That's the letter E, the number 4, the letter E, pod.com/journey. And now back to Clay. And there's a transition there in what you described, Clay, from a pure focus on technology as a programmer and learning the hardware. You mentioned Commodores and Tandys, which many of our listeners will have to Google to find out what they were. But then you got involved on the service side of business. You had clients, and you had to provide service to clients. Can you remember how that felt about going from technology to a service business? Was that conscious?
Yeah, actually, one of the things that prepared me for that was my teenage years working for my grandfather, and also for that local entrepreneur that hired me as a programmer, because in both cases they dealt with customers directly. So I got to watch them negotiate contracts. I got to watch them deal with customer complaints or difficulties, or even planning out projects. And so I learned how to approach different customers, how to approach different projects. And even when I got connected with the angel investor, I got to see a higher level of business operations. Now we're talking about larger scale firms that can actually go public on the stock market. I learned a lot about how the actual process of taking a company public actually works, and how a firm can turn into a bureaucracy if you're not careful over time. And so I started to assimilate a lot of that knowledge, and started to really distill that down into dealing with my own consulting customers. And of course, when you're young like that, you make a lot of mistakes, and you learn a lot in the process. But overall, as long as you're continuing to move forward, continuing to learn what you did wrong and continuing to invest that knowledge into the next customer, you eventually build up a crude knowledge base that allows you to really perform very well over time.
You said you had a local entrepreneur who was your partner initially, but it sounds like you evolved into your own independent company quickly, serving clients. And did you pick your clients? Did you pick your project? Or again, was that sort of an emergent process?
It was kind of an emergent process, although the as I was working with this particular individual, he was very focused in his business on developing software for schools and developing and growing that business in that market. For me, I had a lot, and at this particular time, like I said, at the late '90s into the early 2000s, there was so much technology being built, so many new companies being founded, and so many new tools that were out there. Business owners, local business owners, were interested in applying technology to their business. Remember, this is people are still using 28 K modems at this time. We don't even have high speed internet. DSL was not common at that time. And so even entire businesses were running off of very old, antiquated technology, ISDN lines and things like that. So in the process of uh, meeting new people and meeting new business owners and things like that, people would just come out of the woodwork and say, "Hey, Clay, can you help me with this? Can you help me with this?" And that was really kind of the evolution of it, is that different business owners that I would interact with would ask me questions about different types of technology. And eventually the people in my area knew that I was kind of a technology expert in some ways. Looking back, I had a lot less expertise than I thought that I had probably, but anyway, I kind of got a reputation for being someone who knows what they're talking about. So people would even just ask me for advice on different things, and then one thing would lead to another, and before you know it, I would end up building a system for them.
So it was demand-driven business,
Yes, correct.
which is the best kind. So what did you decide was your comparative advantage after a time? What made you grow and thrive in that
Well,
situation?
that did not come until later. So basically, as a private consultant, I had some level of success. I had learned quite a bit. I had a lot of different customers over a wide customer base, but it was generally localized there in North Carolina, South Carolina. And I got a job offer as the chief technology officer of a company in Maryland. And this was about a $40 million a year in revenue company. And I decided to pursue that. My contracts had pretty much not expired, but they were all in maintenance mode. So there wasn't a lot of active development being done on them at the time. And the CEO of the company approached me and asked me to manage their entire technology process. So I thought that this was a good opportunity for me to learn a higher level, a higher scale of business. And so I did, and I stayed with that company for about a year. But the transition introduced me into a brand new market. I really, in the Washington, D.C., Maryland Beltway, there are a lot of different companies. There was a lot of different opportunity at that time. And I was kind of a transplant into that market. And I learned, and through meeting a lot of different people, I was able to jump from that role as chief technology officer to actually founding a company in the organ and tissue transplant business. And that particular point in my life is where I would say I became a real entrepreneur, where I had some knowledge of actually what I was doing and actually built a firm that was successful. I was 25 years old at that time, and the state of Maryland, in the organ and tissue transplantation industry, there are 58 organizations that do organ and tissue recovery and transplantation. and they're all part of a national association, and they are all non-competitive. So they're all responsible for a geographic area, and they are all kind of cooperative with each other. So they asked me to build a system for them. And what they normally do is they will say, they put a 80-page medical chart in front of me and said, okay, we want this paper to be on the screen. And usually you would make some type of relational database structure. You would build forms that match the paper forms so that people can do data entry and have a very structured system. But then what happened was, as we started to build this out for this group in Maryland, 9 other organizations across the country became interested in what we were doing. They said, we will fund you the seed capital to start your firm. It's going to be a nonprofit technology firm focused on just this industry. And we're going to have you build this application for organ and tissue transplantation across the United States. And that was great from an opportunity standpoint. But from a technological standpoint, it was very, very complicated, because at this point now, it's not just I have to take an 80-page medical chart and put the paper onto the screen, but now I have to actually build a system that can serve the entire country. And in every single organization across the country, I have to support their individual business logic, their individual business rules, calculations, their individual workflows. And all of this customization was going to be very, very expensive. So what we did is we stepped back. We actually built a development tool. We built a drag and drop interface that would allow us to build these systems unique to every single organization in the country, unique to their workflow, unique to their documents. And we actually built that entire tool first, and then built the systems on top of that tool. So at one time, I think about half of the organ and tissue transplants in the United States were processed off the systems that I designed. The company itself, I believe, still exists today. I think the number has gone down in terms of the percentage. I think maybe 25 or 30% now still operate off of those systems. But that is where I would say that was my coming of age in terms of being an entrepreneur, where we actually became a real firm with a real market, with real technology, and kind of expanded.
A quick note. Did you know that we provide supplemental materials for each podcast? Listening to and understanding the key takeaways from our expert guests helps you think better about building a more beautiful business. Taking direct action and implementing these strategies is when the real work begins. Take a concrete, immediate step to implementing a better business model today by downloading the show notes and business tool we've created for this episode. Visit Mises.org/E4EPod. That's MISES.org/E4EPOD and click on today's episode. Now, back to our interview.
Yeah, and the classic, this is a big problem to solve. How do we go about solving it? It sounds like you went through that process. Yeah, good. So then how did you proceed from there? I know that you're now running your business from Asia, but I don't have the steps that got you from organ and tissue transplant to there. So take us through the next steps.
So actually, as I was developing software for organ and tissue transplants, we were well funded, but we were on a shoestring budget. We only had a staff of about 14 people. And when you're talking about building a massive system for the entire country, having that all rest on 14 people is quite daunting, especially when you're talking about maintaining it and supporting it. So I started to look at foreign outsourcing as a solution for cost-effective programming. And eventually, after going through several different firms, I found some independent outsourcers in Thailand, and I came over here and actually met with them and set up a company inside of Thailand just with this group of programmers. And eventually, one of the side effects was that I met my wife through through this. She was actually my project manager for all of my staff here, and a lot of the staff that worked here were people that she had gone to college with. She graduated in IT. A lot of them were IT or computer science majors, and so actually that was kind of a permanent association with me in
Right.
Thailand at that point in time. And so that was an interesting outgrowth of that. But that's where that started. Life Logics, or the organ and tissue uh, um, transplantation technology firm, actually we the firm still exists today, but we went into kind of a maintenance mode because our company charter specified that we could only take this technology inside of the organ and tissue transplantation industry. And there are only 58 organizations around the country that do this. So we, after 5 years, we essentially had locked our competition into their silo, and we had our customers in our silo, and everyone had chosen, everyone in the market had chosen their solution, and so there wasn't really a lot of ability for us to grow beyond that. So what we decided to do, or what I decided to do, was I will go ahead and withdraw from the company. We'll continue to keep the staff there for maintenance, but I'll go ahead and branch out into consulting. But I kept my labor force here in Thailand to continue moving forward.
Mhm.
So after that, of course, over the years, I had made a lot of different connections in across different industries, even outside of the healthcare industry. And so I went into private consulting again, but this time with a firm of programmers alongside of me, and we ended up connecting with several different local businesses in the area, and we ended up branching out into financial services. We ended up branching out into mobile application development and security, and also artificial intelligence development. And through that process, I ended up becoming the chief technology officer in each of my customers' firms. So I kind of became an outsourced IT department where I helped their business to strategize and plan their technology strategy and budgeting and how that aligns with their business goals, as well as actually performing the work and doing the projects.
So you're an external CTO in that
That's
regard.
correct. Yeah, that's correct.
So that is that a business model that's common, or is it pretty unique that you've created?
It's very unique. It's quite unusual. There is a problem, I think, with most outsourcing models, and the problem is that normally when you have a outsourcing project, the mindset of the firm that hires you is that, okay, we're going to do this project for 6 months. Once the project is over, we are going to move on to something else. And maybe 3 months later, we're going to come back and ask for upgrades or features or something else. So as a system is used inside the business, information comes in from the market, information comes in from the business, and they end up trying to determine what they're going to change about it, how they're going to adapt the business to the system, and what changes that they're going to need going forward. The problem with that is as you go through a outsourcing project in a normal outsourcing environment, they normally have maybe, let's say you've got 6 people working for you for 6 months, and the project finishes, and the business that you have contracted with maybe doesn't come back with any new updates or any new changes for
Mhm.
another 3 months or something of that nature. The problem is that if you are the laborers, the workers that have been writing code for you on that project, they will probably not be there after 3 months. So when the company comes back, there's no accrued knowledge. You have to set up an entirely new team to serve now the project that's already been built. So you have to, it works much better if you are a team that is an extension of the firm, but at the same time you retain your flexibility where you can move in and out of projects seamlessly and keep that accrued knowledge. So all of my programmers that work for me, most of them have been with me for maybe 10 years now. And they have worked on every single project across multiple companies. And when one company is in motion, maybe another company is latent. And then when another company has a project that it needs to get done, the other company now is latent. But yet you can use that accrued knowledge and move resources across multiple firms in order to provide the flexibility, but not to lose any of the knowledge that you've gained as you've been building their projects. And then as an embedded CTO with the company, you're able to help the company move forward in terms of strategy and direction. Technology and programming is very specialized. And CEOs, entrepreneurs are orchestrators. We orchestrate capital and production process. But when you have a very specialized production process, like building software or some type of technology, a lot of times the CEO or the entrepreneur, the founder of the company, may not have the specialized knowledge to really orchestrate the production of software. They can orchestrate the production of their product, but if you're going to start building software, that may be a realm that they're not familiar enough with, and they need somebody else to be an orchestrator on their behalf. So that's really what the role of the CTO is. The CTO is there to look at the firm's goals, look at the revenue of the firm, look at the customers of the firm, and align the process of development and their technology with where the firm wants to go. Where does the CEO want to go? So how are we going to build systems to move this forward? You really need an embedded person to do that. So you have really two choices. You can either hire someone full time and who then has to hire other people underneath them to manage the software development process. And now we have people on salary. Now we maybe have outsourced teams that are supplemental, and the firm all of a sudden becomes a technology company. And they spend a lot of time managing the process of actually building technology as opposed to actually doing the business that they're trying to do in the first place. So I really see the role of the embedded CTO as someone who can take that orchestration of building technology and aligning the technology with the goals of the firm away from the CEO, and to help the entire firm move forward without focusing on becoming a technology company by itself. So that's something that has served us well over the years, and it is an unusual business case. But I think as we go into the future, and especially with the COVID situation, where now almost everyone is working remotely, there are going to be a lot of firms, I think, that are going to be questioning their full-time salaried C-suite and wondering about alternatives.
Right. And what's the organizational structure on your side, Clay? Are the programmers and the techs who work for you employees,
Correct.
or are they contractors, or how do they work?
They work for me as contractors, but it ends up, because I have enough clientele, it ends up pretty much to them is the effect of being salaried, even though technically they're all contractors for me. That, like I said, most of them have worked for me for 10 years. Some probably the youngest one, I guess you could say, would be 5 years. So most of my employees have been with me for quite a while, and we rotate them across different projects and different clientele at different times. And they're all contractors. They work directly for me, but I am the architect of the systems. So I design how the systems are going to work, and then pass that design down to the programmers, and then they implement it. There are still a lot of cases where I write code myself, depending on the type of application that it is. I think probably 60% of my time is still spent in active coding because it's very important not only to keep your own skills sharp so you understand how to make decisions, but also that certain things, if you have it in your own, the design in your mind, the way that you want it to work, you can build the structure for someone else to go in and fill in the gaps. So you really work as like an architect and design the structure, and then you can have your programmers fill in the gaps depending on where you need their flexibility.
Yeah. And what have you learned about process management and project management, Clay? What are your favorite tools? I keep hearing from tech people that that's a critical component of managing a team like the one you have and managing projects like the ones you've described. Well, how do you manage it from a project management standpoint?
Right. So there are a lot of different tools that we use. I tend to adapt my tools to the customer that I'm dealing with because different customers will use different tools inside their business. So we want to be flexible. If some group uses Slack, for example, or somebody uses Microsoft Teams, we want to be able to support all of that. So part of the tools that we use are dependent on the customer that we're working with. But internally, I like to use things like Jira. One of the reasons we use Jira is because we can tie tickets to source code directly, so we can map things, a specific feature or a specific bug, all the way back to the source code that was checked in in order to address this particular issue. And also, we use, obviously, communication is very important. We use Slack. I use Skype because I can use a United States number. So I have a U.S. number that all my customers can call me at any time, and it's not complicated. They don't have to install a different app. They can just pick up the phone and call me. A lot of my customers actually have me on speed dial on an extension. So they just have an extension number that routes to my phone here in Thailand. So what we want to do is we want to use our communication tools to make the distance transparent. We do not want the distance to be a barrier, or even really, we don't want the customers to feel the distance at all. We want them to be able to communicate with us just as if we were there inside of the firm and working with them side by side. So
Yeah.
we use a lot of communication tools. We use a lot of project management tools. But one thing to remember is that I think the process of production is always more important than the tools that we use, because sometimes you can get into the mindset that, okay, we're going to work this tool rather than letting the tool work for us. If some customer calls me and with a serious problem that we need to fix right away, whether we have a ticket set up for it in the project management system yet or anything like that, that is all secondary to the fact that we've got some production problem that we need to address right now. We need to make sure that's taken care of first, and then we can go back and backfill the project management system later. A lot of times, certain tools can create bureaucracy for you, and you do not want that. You want to make sure that your tools are always supplemental, and it's not that your whole organization is built around working with a specific tool.
Yeah. What you described strikes me also as a great case of empathy, thinking how your client wants to feel. They want to be able to bang on that extension number and get you immediately
Right.
and, hey, Clay, we got a problem.
Right.
That's what the economists would call empathic.
Correct.
So let's go there. We're all about Austrian economics here. I know you're a great student of Austrian economics. We're working together to help figure out how to apply economics to business. And how did you get involved in Austrian economics? How did you find it, or how did you find you, and how did you become so deeply involved with it?
Originally, I started out my economic life as a monetarist, believe it or not. And the reason why is because, as I mentioned, I grew up in the South in North Carolina and in the Reagan era. And so my family were big conservatives, Republicans, and the influence of Reagan's free market economics was from Milton Friedman. And so, even as a young person, I read a lot of Milton Friedman's books, and I would read people like Thomas Sowell or Walter E. Williams or someone like that. And I learned a lot of economics. I had a natural desire to understand how things work, and that's related to computer science and in systems development, and also in the world, which is economics. Economics explains how things work, and
Hmm.
so for me, I really just always had a burning curiosity to know why things are the way that they are. So economics is the key to that. And so as a teenager, I really thought that I was a free market economist. The Chicago school was really all I had read, is really all I knew. But then later on, I discovered Hayek's Road to Serfdom. And after I read Hayek's Road to Serfdom, I read a couple of other works from him, and that was my introduction to the Austrian school. So at the time, I was probably 19, 20 years old. Eventually, that led me to Mises. I read Human Action when I was 21 or 22, and it really struck me, of all the principles laid out in Human Action, the thing that struck me the most was the depth of thinking that Mises took on something very simple of human action.
Hmm.
Okay, people act purposefully. The entire economy is a result of the collective actions of human beings that are acting purposefully based on their own value scale, their own subjective values, and that's what is the root cause of everything that we're seeing going on. And for me, being able to look at something that seems so common sense, or seems like you would take it for granted, and be able to really drill down and open that up and really think through that logically, was very impressive to me. And so after I read Human Action, I read The Theory of Money and Credit. And at that point, I had to come to crossroads in my economic theory, because I had to decide, if I'm a free market economist, if I believe in free markets and I say that's the best way to organize society, why do I not also believe that in money? Why do I believe that a central bank, a government monopoly on the creation of money, is better than a free market in money? And so I knew, in order to be intellectually consistent, I was going to have to become an Austrian. So at that point, that was really where I would say I became a converted Austrian economist at that point in time. Is that, okay, I'm going to dedicate myself to the free market completely, with no reservations, and with no qualifications. And of course, after that, I read Rothbard and Man, Economy, and State, and many of Rothbard's works. And of course, at that time, we have to ask ourselves the question: is the state really necessary?
Hmm.
And at that point in time, I kind of crossed over into the anarcho-capitalist side of the philosophy. But after that, I still continued, obviously, reading a lot of our forefathers, Bastiat, von Bobrik, those individuals, even modern Austrians today, like Per Byland on the nature of the firm, and Peter Klein on entrepreneurship, Jeff Herbner in interest and time preference. I've been influenced by all of those individuals, and really, I think, in terms of theory and understanding how things actually work, the Austrian school has no comparison. The mathematical economists have no answer other than large aggregated data sets and models that they've already pre-formed to fit with what they think their vision of the world is already. So the good thing about it is that we care about the individual. We care about how individuals think. How do they feel? How do they act? And that is what the basis of Austrian economics is. And that directly ties in to being a good entrepreneur, because
Hmm.
that's just naturally what you have to be concerned with as a business person.
And so, do you find yourself actively applying Austrian principles as you do your business? Is that a conscious act that you're pursuing?
Yes. Yeah. Sometimes consciously, probably sometimes unconsciously, because after 20 years of studying this, it's kind of become second nature in my own internalized philosophy. So sometimes I probably act of it out of instinct. But things like flexible capital structure, even the whole concept of an embedded CTO inside of an organization that has the incentive to move the business forward with flexible capital underneath. That is really an Austrian type concept. The concepts of agile for being able to prototype and iterate over software development projects. That's also got its roots in a lot of Austrian style thinking. Accrued knowledge as a means to reduce uncertainty, and this one is kind of interesting because one of the hardest things to do as a programmer and as a software developer is to estimate programming projects, because you're not baking cakes. It's not like, okay, throw everything in a bowl, mix it together, put it in an oven at 350 degrees, and in an hour you're going to get something that looks like this out of the oven. That's not the way that projects work. There are all kinds of uncertainties. There are environmental uncertainties. When you install something, you're not sure if it's going to work exactly the way that you expect. There are new, between the time you start a project and the time you end a project, there are new requirements that are coming in and have to be mixed in all the time. You have to be able to handle those seamlessly without delaying the project and those types of things. So you have to, using accrued knowledge is a way to reduce uncertainty looking forward when you're estimating a project, because if I'm the person who has worked on a specific project for 10 years, there's a high likelihood that I'm going to know in general how long it's going to take to do X, Y, and Z. I will know how long it's going to take to integrate a new system into an existing system because I built that maybe 8 years ago or something like that. So it's a way to reduce uncertainty with your scaling as you're building out new systems, as you're building out new projects. You become more and more accurate with your estimation because you have done this over and over for the same customer for a certain number of years. And that accrued knowledge reduces the uncertainty that you have, and you can kind of foresee the roadblocks ahead of time. And I guess another application of Austrian economics, especially in artificial intelligence, is that we can use AI as an ultra personalization tool rather than as a big data aggregation tool. And I think a lot of AI firms are making a mistake in using AI as a giant data aggregation and analysis tool rather than what it could be, and that is to provide ultra personal experiences and having systems that really know the customers that are interacting with this particular system and giving them a special experience that's specific to them because the system knows them very, 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 very intimately. I think that's the value of AI as opposed to trying to build large statistical aggregates of your market and then trying to apply that to an entire demographic and saying, well, everybody within 24 to 35 years old is probably going to like this because our big data says that 90% of them like this. Well, maybe not. It's really we should be really focused on the individual and what we can learn more and more about the individual.
Yeah. I saw a paper the other day with the title AI is the new UX, meaning think of it as a user experience, which, as you said, drives you to the individual. It drives you to subjectivity because that user is subjectively trying to figure out how best to use the AI you're providing to them. And I agree. I think that's the direction to go in. So, let's wrap up there for today, Clay. Thank you very much for describing your entrepreneurial journey. Very original with a lot of insights. And thanks for making the connection to Austrian economics. And next time when you come back, I think we might talk about maybe more specifically some of the main points of Austrian economics that we think are most relevant to business and how we can help people to apply them, because application is the key, not just the theory. The theory is important. The application is also important for business people. So,
right.
Many, many thanks. And I know you're in Thailand working U.S. hours. So
yes, that's right.
there's still a day in front of you. That's another clever piece of your business model.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for having me, and I really appreciate it.
We enjoyed it very much, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you, Clay.
Okay, thank you.
Economics for Entrepreneurs is a production of the Mises Institute. To explore more content like this, visit Mises.org. That's MISES.org. For more from Hunter Hastings, check out hunterhastings.com.